in modern society, we don't live in villages. We don't often have family support at our fingertips. The nature of society demands that we work, and therefore meaning expectations that are placed on us, often ones we do not want. And as a result, our sympathetic nervous system is chronically activated to the detriment of so many of us. And this results in chronic sense of fear, anxiety, and leads to a lot of mental health issues. So it's very, very difficult for people, because the way we should live is to have a sense of calmness about us and connection to others. And not only does this improve our health, but it has a huge impact on our longevity. And you simply look at the work by Bob Buettner with the blue zones, or the 85-year-old Harvard study, which is called the Adult Development Study, but many people use the term the Longevity and Happiness Study that's run by Robert Waldinger.
Yeah, and the common ingredient for longevity and wellness is meaningful social relationships.
Absolutely.
And the rise of superficial relationships through social media is not equating to that, to many people's surprise. I do want to go into how we started these conversations, negative self-talk that you alluded to. So why is negativity the first language of our species, speaking of evolution?
Well, first of all, and this is why we don't have positive news media, right? Because if things are okay, you're not interested in what's going on around you. Because you have been biologically attuned to threat, because you need to survive. And so as a result, on a subconscious level, you're always looking around for threat. And I would argue that your subconscious is on 24/7, if you will. And as a result, we have negativity bias. And then as sort of an overflow from that, when we hear negative comments about ourselves, oftentimes those get embedded within us. And as a result, we're constantly telling ourselves we're not good enough or we're not worthy. And of course, because again, the nature of how we've evolved into a modern society, and I'm not sure if modern's the right word, has had a huge impact on that. If you look at some cultures, ancient cultures, and actually, frankly, third world countries, many of those people don't have any of these concerns about negative self-talk.
Yeah, and I think that's like the irony of when we prioritize GDP power and what can we see as like the progression on the surface level, we often forget the intangible and the implicit.
Well, and this is what's so sad, because unfortunately, if you look at the narrative that we have promoted, which has now been globalized, we have people from underdeveloped countries somehow believing that we offer something better for them. And they'll come to this country with a false impression that the roads are paved with gold. And they get here and they realize it is a extractive, ruthless environment, far different. And then they have the same diseases that we have. And in fact, it's horrible to watch the globalization, because you simply watch over decades what happens. And you get a dramatic increase in disease. You get obesity, a significant increase in depression, anxiety, suicide.
Yeah.
I would say, frankly, in many ways, the West offers nothing, except for many people, great unhappiness. And as we've seen, the nature of our species is that there are a lot of horribly mean people. And we have an ever-increasing income inequality that is a result of ruthless greed and extractive corporate manipulation. And this is doing no one any good except for a small set of extraordinarily wealthy individuals. And of course, these are the same individuals who run Davos. And as you well know, as soon as a person who has privilege is confronted with their privilege, they somehow suddenly feel oppressed.
You are literally the perfect person to say this, because you went through I have it all to back to nothing, back to transformations, back to the work you're doing now. We won't go into too much of that since all that juicy details in your first book and also in your new book as well. But I promise that you like what Dr. Doty is saying, he is the right person to say this. And I do want to segue into my favorite passage from your book to really nail your message home. Humans are imperfect creatures, and our desires are often imperfect too. When we picture owning a Ferrari, we envision ourselves cruising down the highway at top speed, relishing the devil-may-care freedom that we believe wealth gives us. We do not imagine the pain of having no one to share adventure with. And when we picture a mansion to live in, we see a warm and vibrancy in a family life. We do not imagine our family fractured by a lack of intimacy and ourselves alone facing the cell of our home. We imagine the things we want, but not the complexities they bring.
That's true.
Yeah. And I think we could end the conversation here. But everything you said, I think really summarized well in that passage, but it's true. We only see the explicit, what the society value is, but we don't see all the invisible and intangible strings that are attached.
No, that's exactly right. And as you know from both my first book and this book, there's this false narrative. And we were talking about what, in some ways, society defines as success. And typically it's power, money, position. And the false narrative is that if you obtain those, that equates with happiness. And when I entered this magic shop, as a young person, 12, who grew up with an alcoholic father and a mother who was had a stroke and was an invalid, chronically depressed, attempted suicide. We were on public assistance. From that background, of course, I looked at the people who had. And these are the people who lived in nice houses and were wealthy and drove expensive cars. And it seemed to me that that was success. And of course, sadly, the people who have obtained that type of success are very proud to promote that because the reality is they have nothing else. And they believe that people admiring them or wanting to be like them will fill the void that they have in themselves. And of course, sadly, the have-nots look at these people and buy into the false Western capitalist narrative that these people are happy. And I'll explain the difference here for you. As I mentioned from my first book, this was related to meeting a woman in a magic shop who was not the owner, but the owner's mother. And she taught me a meditation practice, a mindfulness practice, if you will. She taught me self-compassion and the ability to change my internal narrative, and then to recognize that everyone is suffering, and oftentimes that the nature of their suffering actually is the driver behind their behaviors, not necessarily what's going on in that moment. And then she taught me a visualization technique or a manifestation technique. And as a 12-year-old, I had no clue. I had no self-awareness. So I made a list of the 10 things that I thought were important and would make me happy. And one was to be a doctor, which is a very honorable profession. And don't get me wrong, I was always a very good doctor and cared. But I was a doctor because I was a doctor, right? And I was recognized. The other aspect was I wanted to live in a mansion. Why? Because people would see me in the mansion. I wanted a Porsche, a silver Porsche. I wanted a Rolex watch. And I got every one of those things. It's interesting because here, at one point, I had an 8,000 square foot home overlooking the bay in Newport Beach. I had a villa on the top of a building in San Francisco. A penthouse on the top of a building in San Francisco. I had a villa in Florence. I was buying an island in New Zealand. Had a Ferrari, a Porsche, a BMW, a Range Rover, a Mercedes in the garage. I was dating starlets. I was flying on private jets. All my friends were telling me how great I was. And of course, when you chase these goals, you get to the top of the mountain and you stand there and you want all this external affirmation. What happened was I was never more unhappy than I had ever been in my life because none of those things filled that void. And I couldn't understand what had gone wrong because I had done everything the way I thought I was supposed to, and by every narrative of societal success. Yet why was I unhappy? And the problem was that I was attached to the things that define my success and did not understand that those things are transitory and frankly meaningless. And when I ended up losing $80 million or so in the dot-com crash, obviously this got my attention. And I tell people, two people became my best friends. One was my banker, because at that time, if you had publicly traded stock, you could borrow against it. So I had borrowed $15 million. And the other was my lawyer, who I had to deal with as a result of having to liquidate many things. And he had set up several charitable trusts. And so I spent a lot of time with these people. And here I was, minus $3 million in the hole. As a result, I went back to my house in Newport Beach, which actually had been sitting pretty much empty for some time. And I reflected on the situation of what happened to me. Where did I misstep? And I realized that, as I said, it was all about me. And when I went through this period of reflection, and I was discussing the situation with my lawyers, because I had put a lot of my stock in a company that had not yet gone public into a charitable trust. And while, don't get me wrong, it wasn't that I wasn't interested in doing good, but primarily it was a tax write-off, right? And as we all know, wealthy people, they do tax write-offs, and you will see that they will never give anything beyond what they can get a tax write-off for. And that's just truth. Regardless, after this period of reflection, my lawyer informed me that they had actually not filed all the paperwork, and I could actually retain that stock that I had put into this charitable trust. And after this period of reflection, I decided to go ahead and still give it away to charity. And that ended up being $30 million. And what happened was I set up health clinics around the world, blood banks, programs for the disabled, programs for the handicapped, programs for adolescents affected by AIDS, HIV, because I had a sibling who died of AIDS, scholarships. I endowed chairs at various universities. What I realized through that period of reflection was that our purpose in this life is to be of service, to care for others. We talked about the blue zones and how we have a genetic imperative to care, not only within our nuclear family, but within our tribe, but frankly, within the world. And this is when clarity happened. Because when I did that, I changed how I looked at the world. And although I had some of that earlier, it really didn't hit me, because I no longer was burdened about coming from poverty. I no longer carried the shame or the insecurity or the fear, because that's a driver for a lot of people who have backgrounds like my own. And frankly, for a lot of people in general, is they need to grab onto something that shows their worth. And as you well know, seeking external affirmation never solves that problem. We talk about the endless possibilities of our mind and our limited beliefs that we create for ourselves. We are the only ones who can give ourselves happiness. We are only the ones who can release the monkey on our backs. We're the only ones who can give ourselves love. And so once I changed how I saw the world, everything changed for me. And then I realized that the acquisition of things as a armor that you carry around to show the world how important you are is worthless. And this is not an anti-materialistic narrative. And because it's not that I'm against people having nice things, but it is a statement that all the nice things in the world are not going to make you whole. And they imprison you if you're not able to look at them for what they are, which is just things. And so for me, if I, and I will tell you, I live in a very nice house. I drive a Porsche. I live very well. If all of that is gone tomorrow, It's absolutely irrelevant. It was great while it lasted. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Believe me, it's wonderful to drive a Ferrari or a Porsche. But it's irrelevant. What is most important is caring for others, being of service, and looking through the lens of how can I help you? And the reason that's important is really something that not only has been verified by neuroscience, but is something that the Dalai Lama has said. If you want others to be happy, be compassionate. If you wish to be happy, be compassionate. And it's really very, very true. Again, in some ways, and if you look at this maybe in a metacognition sense, the acquisition of things or believing that stuff is important actually is a fear narrative. It's a fear narrative based out of our insecurities, our anxieties, and a belief if I can just cover myself with these things, I won't have those. Versus if you look through the lens of being of service, that, as we were talking about earlier, engagement of your parasympathetic nervous system or your rest and digest system, that is how we evolved to live. And if you were focused on that, your physiology works its best. You're much healthier. It has a huge impact on your immune system. And it affects even your telomere length. It increases your longevity. And we already mentioned the work of Bob Buettner and Robert Waldinger that validate this statement. And so if you want to manifest the best way with the highest possibility of actually having your intention manifest, you really have to be in the right mental state. And that mental state has to be the narrative of how can I be of service? Because what happens is two things. One, you realize oftentimes what you thought you wanted isn't really what you needed. And also, if you care for other people and are focused there, actually that creates the environment where you actually benefit in all sorts of ways you couldn't even possibly imagine. Because the energy you let out of yourself, and we can talk about vibration or oscillation or whatever you wish, but how you carry yourself, the energy you put out has a profound, profound effect on how the rest of the world responds to you.
Yeah, I think a quote from your book, compassion of the heart, what you want isn't always what you need, I think really drives the message home.